The global economy is at a breaking point, and the battle for dominance has never been so intense. For decades, the United States and China have stood as the world's largest economies, each holding massive influence. But as tensions rise, it's clear that the US and China are now locked in a trade war with stakes higher than ever before. If you are finding this interesting, please subscribe. The US thought it could force China into submission by slapping tariffs on Chinese imports, believing that China would buckle under pressure. But things didn't go as planned. Instead of backing down, China hit back with a calculated response that sent shockwaves through key American industries. This wasn't just a simple trade dispute. It was a clear signal that the balance of power was shifting, and Washington's grip on the global economy was weakening. This battle is not just about numbers or goods, it's about who controls the rules of trade. The tariffs, the retaliation, and the shifting alliances are all pieces of a much larger mystery. As the US and China continue to clash, it's not just their economies on the line, it's the future of global trade itself. Will the US remain in control, or is China setting the stage for a new economic order? With every move, the pressure builds. The world is watching, and the outcome will affect us all. The next few years will change everything. On February 4th, 2025, the United States launched a bold move, imposing a sweeping 10% tariff on all Chinese imports. This wasn't just a slap on the wrist, it was meant to send a strong message to China and the world that the US still held the reins of global trade. The idea behind the tariff was simple. Apply financial pressure to force China to make concessions and come to the table on America's terms. The US believed that this would push China to back down, just like other countries had in the past when faced with tariffs. But the strategy went deeper than that. The US was hoping to reshape the global trade landscape, asserting its dominance and reminding China who was in charge. By targeting Chinese goods, the US wanted to weaken China's economy, force it to reconsider its policies, and reassert American economic power. The tariffs also fit into a larger effort to bring jobs and manufacturing back to the US, putting the interests of American workers at the center of trade negotiations. This move was part of a broader strategy to ensure that the US remained the dominant force in global trade, challenging China's rising influence. But what the US didn't anticipate was how China would respond, and how those tariffs might not just hurt China, but end up hurting America too. Just 6 days after the US imposed its 10% tariffs, China came back with a staggering $14 billion in retaliatory tariffs. This wasn't a knee-jerk reaction, it was a calculated, strategic move. China knew it couldn't match the US dollar for dollar in a trade war, but it also understood the power of targeting key industries that would hit America where it hurt most. Rather than slapping tariffs across the board, China focused its retaliation on American sectors that relied heavily on Chinese trade, like energy, agriculture, and automotive. Energy exports, including liquefied natural gas and coal, were a prime target. By imposing tariffs on these resources, China sent a clear message to US energy firms that they would no longer have a guaranteed market. The agricultural sector felt the blow too, but China didn't target raw products. Instead, it focused on machinery, specifically farming equipment made by American giants like John Deere and Caterpillar. This hit manufacturers directly while leaving farmers stuck with fewer options. China's calculated strategy was simple. Make the pain felt in industries crucial to the US economy, while keeping its own economy relatively insulated. The goal wasn't just retaliation, it was a step toward a new economic balance that would challenge the US's global dominance. China's response to the US tariffs was anything but random. It was a masterclass in strategic precision. Rather than just imposing tariffs across the board, China focused on sectors that were crucial to the US economy, effectively hitting where it hurt most. This was no knee-jerk retaliation. It was a deliberate effort to weaken key industries in the US while preserving its own economic stability. The first target was energy. For years, American companies had relied on China as a major buyer of liquefied natural gas, LNG, coal, and crude oil. By slapping tariffs on these resources, China sent a clear message that it no longer needed US energy exports. With plenty of alternatives like Russia and the Middle East offering cheaper options, American energy companies found themselves struggling to secure new markets. Next, China turned its focus to agriculture. Instead of targeting raw agricultural products, which had been the focus of previous trade disputes, China went after agricultural machinery, products from companies like John Deere and Caterpillar. This tactic hit manufacturers directly while forcing American farmers into a tough spot, unable to get the same high-tech machinery they had relied on. In these targeted strikes, China wasn't just retaliating, it was playing a long game, weakening America's economic power and shifting the balance of global trade. The energy industry in the U.S. was one of the hardest hit by China's retaliatory tariffs. American companies had long relied on China as a major customer for liquefied natural gas, LNG, coal, and crude oil, seeing the country as a key part of their global growth strategy. But when China imposed a 15% tariff on LNG and coal, everything changed. U.S. energy exports became more expensive, and China began looking for alternatives. Instead of depending on U.S. suppliers, China turned to other countries like Russia, Qatar, and Gulf states who were more than willing to step in and provide cheaper, untaxed energy resources. These shifts in trade relationships were not just temporary fixes. They were part of a long-term strategy for China to reduce its reliance on American energy. This shift left U.S. energy companies scrambling to secure new buyers in an increasingly competitive market. The impact of these tariffs was far-reaching. U.S. energy firms saw shrinking profits, a loss of market share, and increasing difficulty in maintaining their position in the global energy sector. What once seemed like a stable and profitable market in China was now slipping away, forcing American companies to rethink their strategies and search for new markets, all while watching China grow closer to new, more reliable suppliers. While previous trade wars saw China targeting raw agricultural goods like soybeans, this time the strategy was different. Instead of focusing on crops, China zeroed in on American agricultural machinery, specifically targeting high-tech equipment made by giants like John Deere and Caterpillar. This move hit the U.S. farming industry directly at its core, the machinery that farmers depend on to operate efficiently and effectively. By imposing tariffs on this equipment, China made it significantly more expensive for Chinese buyers to purchase American-made machinery. As a result, many Chinese farmers and agricultural businesses turned to alternatives, seeking machinery from European manufacturers or even local Chinese brands. This shift not only impacted the demand for American equipment, but also caused U.S. manufacturers to see reduced orders and potential job losses. The ripple effect of these tariffs extended beyond manufacturers to American farmers themselves. Many of these farmers relied on high-tech equipment to maximize their yields and minimize costs. With the price of American machinery rising, they were left with fewer options for affordable, advanced farming tools. As farming costs increased, so did the pressure on an already struggling industry, creating a tough road ahead for U.S. agriculture in the face of these new economic realities. When China imposed tariffs on U.S. vehicles, especially large engine cars and pickup trucks, it hit American automakers hard. For decades, companies like Ford and General Motors had seen China as a crucial market, relying on the growing demand for their vehicles to boost profits. But with new tariffs making these cars more expensive, their competitiveness in the Chinese market began to crumble. As American cars became pricier, Chinese consumers started looking elsewhere. The rising popularity of domestic electric vehicle manufacturers like BYD and NIO made the shift even more noticeable. On top of that, European and Japanese car brands, already well established in China, became even more attractive, offering a wider range of vehicles at more competitive prices. For U.S. automakers like Ford and General Motors, the consequences were severe. Their market share in China shrank, and losing ground in such a fast-growing market wasn't just about short-term losses, it signaled a bigger challenge for their global strategy. As the Chinese auto market shifted towards more affordable, fuel-efficient, and electric vehicles, American manufacturers found themselves struggling to keep up, fighting not only for survival in China, but also for their place in the future of the global automotive industry. China's response to the trade war went beyond mere retaliation. It was a calculated move to shift its economic strategy toward greater self-sufficiency. For years, China had relied on U.S. imports in critical sectors like energy, agriculture, and automobiles. But with the imposition of tariffs and the growing tension between the two countries, China realized it needed to reduce its dependency on U.S. goods to strengthen its own economic resilience. In the energy sector, China began diversifying its sources, turning to suppliers like Russia, Qatar, and the Middle East for natural gas and oil. This shift allowed China to lessen its reliance on U.S. energy exports and secure more stable, long-term energy deals with other nations. Similarly, in agriculture, China moved away from American machinery, investing more in domestic production and European alternatives. This change impacted U.S. manufacturers like John Deere and Caterpillar, who had relied heavily on the Chinese market. In the automotive industry, China ramped up its development of electric vehicles, decreasing its need for American-made cars and pickups. By pushing for more self-reliant industries, China wasn't just shielding itself from the impact of tariffs, it was also positioning itself for long-term growth, steadily reducing its dependence on U.S. imports and gaining a stronger foothold in global markets. As the trade war escalated, China shifted its focus to the tech industry, launching a counterattack on some of the biggest U.S. tech giants, Google, Apple, and others. For years, the U.S. had used its power to target Chinese tech companies, such as banning Huawei and scrutinizing TikTok. But now, China was flipping the script. It began investigating U.S. companies for anti-competitive practices, signaling a new phase in the economic conflict. One of the first targets was Google. China launched an antitrust investigation, accusing the company of monopolistic behavior. If the regulators found Google guilty, it could face severe penalties, including massive fines, loss of advertising revenue, and even restrictions on its services in China. The timing was no coincidence. This was China's way of reminding the U.S. that it too could make life difficult for American tech giants. Apple, which had a significant manufacturing base and customer base in China, wasn't far behind. China's potential crackdown on Apple's operations could disrupt its supply chains and affect its sales in one of the world's largest markets. The message from Beijing was clear. If the U.S. wanted to target Chinese tech, China could and would do the same to American firms. The tables were turning in the tech war. China's dominance over the global supply of rare metals has long been a strategic advantage, but now Beijing is tightening its grip even further. With control over more than 70% of the world's supply of critical rare metals, such as lithium, cobalt, and rare earth elements, China holds a powerful card in its ongoing trade conflict with the U.S. These materials are essential for industries ranging from semiconductors to electric vehicles and even defense technologies. In a bold move, China has imposed new export restrictions on these rare metals, making it more difficult and expensive for U.S. companies to access the materials they rely on. This isn't just a minor inconvenience. It's a major blow to industries that are at the heart of American innovation and security. U.S. semiconductor manufacturers, already struggling with supply chain disruptions, now face even greater uncertainty in sourcing the materials they need to produce chips. The electric vehicle industry, which depends heavily on these rare metals for batteries, is also feeling the impact. Companies like Tesla could face rising production costs, slowing their efforts to dominate the EV market. Even the defense sector isn't immune. U.S. military technology, including fighter jets and missile systems, depends on these critical resources, and without reliable access, America's technological edge could be at risk. China's move has shifted the balance, creating new vulnerabilities in U.S. industries. China's unreliable entity list is becoming a powerful weapon in the trade war, and now it's targeting major American companies. The list, which includes firms deemed untrustworthy by China, is causing serious concerns for multinational corporations operating within the country. One of the first high-profile companies added to the list was PVH Corp., the parent company of global brands like Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger. This move is a clear message that China is willing to use its market access as leverage in the ongoing economic conflict. Being added to the unreliable entity list can have severe consequences. Companies on the list risk facing restrictions, losing access to China's vast consumer market, or even being banned from operating in the country altogether. For multinational companies that rely on China for manufacturing, sales, or critical business relationships, the risks are enormous. The The Chinese market is one of the largest in the world, and losing it could cripple a company's growth and profitability. If the yuan begins to replace the US dollar as the preferred currency in global trade, it would weaken America's ability to use its financial power to enforce sanctions or influence international transactions. China's growing economic influence in emerging markets is reshaping the global trade landscape, particularly in regions that were once dominated by the US. Over the past decade, China has been steadily increasing its presence in Latin America, Africa, and Southeast Asia, offering an alternative to US-led trade policies and investments. Through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative, China has built strong economic ties with countries across these regions, investing in infrastructure, technology, and energy projects that have transformed local economies. Southeast Asia has also seen a dramatic shift as China's influence continues to grow through trade agreements, direct investments, and strategic partnerships. As the U.S. pulls back from its traditional role in these regions, China steps in, offering countries the promise of economic growth without the political strings often attached to American aid. This shift is changing global trade patterns. As China strengthens its hold on emerging markets, it's not just challenging the U.S. economically, it's redefining the rules of international trade. Apple, for example, has long depended on China not only for manufacturing, but also for a significant chunk of its consumer market. With rising tariffs and China's tightening grip on its tech industry, Apple has started exploring alternative manufacturing locations, such as India and Vietnam. Tesla, too, is diversifying its production sites, shifting some of its focus to other countries in Asia to minimize exposure to trade disruptions. Intel, which relies on rare metals from China, is also looking for ways to reduce its dependency on Chinese suppliers to ensure a more stable supply chain. If you found this video eye-opening, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your thoughts matter. Let us know in the comments what you think the future holds for global trade.